On Sunday, October 11th, 1987, at 2:47 p.m., the United States Department of Agriculture officially condemned Silas Blackwood's Smokehouse. The notice, a pale yellow sheet of carbon paper, was tacked to the ancient cypress door with a single, shiny thumbtack. By Friday, October 16th, at precisely 9:15 a.m., the same man who tacked it there was standing on Silas's porch, holding a stiff, white envelope containing a formal letter of apology. The story of those 5 days is not about a law, not really. It's about a building made of 98-year-old wood, and the man, 72 years old, who refused to let it die. Let me tell you about the Smokehouse, because you have to understand the building to understand the man. It was built in the autumn of 1889 by Silas's grandfather, a man named Hezekiah Blackwood, who had returned from a timber camp in the Great Smoky Mountains with 4,000 board feet of heart pine and cypress he'd been paid in lieu of wages. The structure was small, just 14 feet wide and 18 feet long, with a steeply pitched roof to shed the heavy snows of the Blue Ridge foothills in which it sat. It had no windows. Its only opening was a single heavy door 3 inches thick that swung on hand-forged iron hinges Hezekiah had traded a cured ham for. Inside, the floor was packed earth, swept clean every day for 98 years. The walls were unpainted, unsealed wood, blackened to a deep, glossy obsidian by nearly a century of cool hickory smoke. To a modern eye, it was a relic. To the USDA, it was a violation. To Silas Blackwood, it was the living memory of his family. Silas was 72 years old in 1987. He had started working in the smokehouse when he was 14, learning the art from his father, who had learned it from Hezekiah. He was a quiet man, known in the county for 2 things: the unparalleled quality of his aged country hams and his profound disinterest in explaining himself. He wore faded denim overalls over a grey work shirt, day in and day out. His hands were gnarled maps of a life spent with salt, smoke, and hogs, but they were as steady as the granite bedrock under his farm. He had inherited the 150-acre farm, the smokehouse, the salt recipe, and the 3 cloth bags used for measuring it when his father passed in 1951. The farm had been in the Blackwood name since 1820. It wasn't just land, it was a covenant. The process was the reason for the smokehouse's condition. It was a ritual unchanged in 3 generations. In late November, after the first hard frost, Silas would slaughter the 8 Berkshire hogs he'd raised that year. The hogs were always slaughtered at 275 pounds, give or take 5. The hams, cut with a bone-in, long shank style that had fallen out of fashion, weighed between 22 and 25 pounds each. For the next 3 days, Silas and his grandson Michael would work in the cool, clean air of the curing shed, a separate, more modern building, packing the hams in salt. Let me tell you about the salt, because it wasn't just salt. It was a mixture. The primary component was coarse sea salt, but mixed into it, in proportions known only to Silas, were black pepper, a pinch of red pepper flake for warmth, and dark brown sugar to mellow the cure. The recipe was never written down. It was kept in 3 specific stained cloth bags that Hezekiah's wife had sewn in 1890. 1 bag held the salt, 1 the pepper, 1 the sugar. The recipe was a ratio of scoops from these bags. Silas would lay a ham on a heavy oak table, his father's table, and cover it completely, rubbing the mixture deep into the flesh around the hock and the H-bone. This was the first defense against spoilage. The salt drew out the water, creating an environment where malevolent bacteria could not survive. This wasn't cooking, it was seasoning, it was preservation. And then, the most important part, the aging. After the smoking, the hams would hang undisturbed in the dark, silent smokehouse for at least 18 months, through the cold of winter, the humid heat of summer, and the cool crispness of another autumn.
During this time, a magical transformation occurred. A fine, dusty green mold, a specific strain of penicillium, would bloom on the surface of the ham. This mold was the secret. It was a living part of the smokehouse, its spores inhabiting the very pores of the ancient wood. It protected the ham from harmful molds and bacteria, and its enzymes broke down the proteins and fats within the meat, creating the complex, nutty, deeply savory flavor that made a Blackwood ham famous. People drove from as far as Charlotte and Richmond to buy one. He sold them for $75 apiece, right off his porch. He never sold more than the 16 hams he produced each year.
It wasn't a business, not in the modern sense. It was a practice.
Into this world walked David Chen on Wednesday, October 7th, 1987. He was 28 years old, had been an inspector with the Food Safety and Inspection Service of the USDA for 4 years, and held a master's degree in food science from Iowa State University. He was sharp, ambitious, but a true believer in the power of modern science and regulation to protect the public. He drove a government-issue Ford sedan that seemed impossibly clean on the gravel road leading to Silas's farm. He carried a stainless steel clipboard and wore a crisp white shirt. He wasn't a villain. He was an emissary of a different world, a world of stainless steel, quantifiable microbial loads, and hazard analysis and critical control points. Chen had been assigned to a new rural outreach program, tasked with inspecting small, previously uninspected producers who sold meat products directly to the public. His arrival was unannounced.
Silas was splitting firewood when the Ford pulled up. His grandson Michael, 19 and home from his first year of agricultural studies at North Carolina State, was the one who went to greet him. Michael was torn. He loved his grandfather, but his professors spoke of efficiency, of scaling up, of modern hygiene protocols. He saw the logic in the world David Chen represented. Chen was polite but firm. He explained that any facility selling meat to the public, even in small quantities, was subject to USDA inspection. He asked to see the smokehouse. Silas said nothing. He simply wiped his hands on his overalls, picked up a heavy iron key from a hook by his back door, and walked the 50 yards to the small, dark building. He unlocked the padlock, a modern concession added in the 1970s, and swung the heavy door open. A cool, earthy, smoky, indescribably complex aroma wafted out. To Silas, it was the smell of his life's work. To David Chen, it was the smell of trouble.
Chen had a small, powerful flashlight. He clicked it on, its sharp white beam cutting through the gloom. It danced over the earthen floor, the blackened walls, the hams hanging like sleeping sentinels from the rafters. He took out a sterile swab from his kit and ran it along one of the wooden walls. He pulled out a thermometer and noted the ambient temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. He made notes on his clipboard, his pen scratching in the silence. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the small space, "I have to be frank. This facility presents numerous critical violations of the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 9, Section 416. Silas just watched him, his face impassive. Michael shifted his weight, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. "The walls," Chen continued, gesturing with his clipboard, "are wood. They're porous, impossible to properly sanitize. They can harbor listeria, salmonella, Clostridium botulinum.
The regulations require all surfaces to be smooth, non-porous, and easily cleanable. Ideally, stainless steel or epoxy-coated concrete." Silas spoke for the first time. His voice was low and raspy, like stones rubbing together. "The walls are the flavor. What you call bacteria, I call culture. My grandfather put it there. My father cultivated it. I maintain it. It's what makes my ham different from the salt-injected, water pump product you approve in factories." Chen blinked, momentarily thrown off his script. I understand the attachment to tradition, sir, but our mandate is public health. This mold, he pointed his light at the beautiful green bloom on one of the hams, is an uncontrolled biological agent. We have no way of knowing if it's producing mycotoxins. Approved starter cultures are available for producers who want this kind of flavor profile. Silas almost smiled, but it was a sad, tired expression. You can't buy this in a bottle, son. This mold has been partners with this wood and this salt for 98 years. Nobody's ever gotten sick from a Blackwood ham. Not in 98 years. That's anecdotal, Mr. Blackwood. We operate on data. The floor is another violation. It must be sealed concrete, sloped to a drain for proper cleaning. This packed earth is a reservoir for contaminants. He went on for another 10 minutes, listing every deviation from the federal code. The lack of hand-washing stations, the absence of temperature logs, the use of wooden shelving, the potential for rodent intrusion, though he saw no evidence of it. It was a comprehensive, data-driven dismantling of Silas's entire world. When he was finished, he looked at Silas, expecting an argument, or perhaps compliance. He got neither. Silas simply stood there, his presence as solid and rooted as the ancient oak tree by his house. Michael, unable to bear the silence, spoke up. "Grandpa, maybe we could put up some of those panels he's talking about." For the next 3 days, Michael pleaded with his grandfather. He printed out articles about modern curing techniques. He got quotes for stainless steel wall panels and for a concrete contractor. He argued that they could adapt, that they could meet the regulations without losing everything. "We can make it work, Grandpa. It's not the end of the world." "It is the end of this world," Silas replied, gesturing to the smokehouse. "That building is a living thing. The wood breathes. The mold is its skin. The smoke is its breath. You can't put it in a metal box and expect it to live." By Saturday evening, Michael had given up. Silas had not moved. He did his chores, ate his supper, and sat on his porch, looking out at the smokehouse as the sun went down. He had not made a single phone call, nor had he written a single word of a remediation plan. He was going to let it happen. It felt to Michael like a surrender, a stubborn, pointless, tragic surrender.
He just sat there, watching the yellow paper flutter in the breeze. Michael came out of the house, his face pale. He had tears in his eyes. "Grandpa, why? Why did you just let him do it? We could have fought." "We are fighting," Silas said, so softly Michael had to lean in to hear. Just not his way. That night, for the first time in his life, Michael saw his grandfather look old. The fight seemed to have drained out of him. He ate little, said nothing, and went to bed early. Michael lay awake, the image of the yellow paper burned into his mind. He felt a rising tide of anger at the government, at the rigid rules, but mostly at his grandfather's seeming refusal to engage with the modern world. He thought his professors were right. The old ways were dying because they couldn't adapt. On Monday morning, Silas did something unexpected. He told Michael, "Get the keys to the truck. We're going into town." He didn't drive much anymore, his eyesight not being what it was.
They drove the 20 miles to the county seat in Silas's 1972 Ford F-100, the engine rumbling like a contented bear. They didn't go to a lawyer's office. They went to the public library. Silas had never been a reader of books, but he knew his way around the county archives, which were housed in the library's basement. He asked the librarian, a woman who had known him her whole life, for the county property and business registration records from 1950 to 1955. He sat at a heavy oak table, the same kind of wood as the one in his curing shed, and began turning the large, brittle pages of the ledgers. Michael sat beside him, confused. "What are we looking for, Grandpa?" "Something my father did," Silas said, not looking up. "He was a worrier, your great-grandfather. Worried about the future. Worried about the government. They were bringing in all sorts of new rules after the war. for the big packing houses. He was afraid they'd come for him, too. For 4 hours they searched. In the early 1950s, American agriculture was industrializing at a breakneck pace. Refrigerated trucking, industrial slaughterhouses, and federal grading standards were creating a uniform national food system. The regulations being written were designed for this new scale. They were about managing immense, centralized facilities, not a 14 by 18-foot smokehouse in the hills. A few senators from rural states, seeing the threat to their constituents' traditional ways of life, slipped an amendment into a massive agricultural appropriations bill. The Agricultural Heritage Exemption Act of 1953 was the result. It was an obscure little law, rarely invoked and largely forgotten. It stated that a food production facility was exempt from certain sanitation and construction codes if it met a strict set of criteria.
Silas Blackwood. And then he read the registration number from the 1954 ledger. There was, Arthur later recounted, a long silence on the other end of the line. The compliance chief, a man who had been with the department for 30 years, had never heard of Public Law 83-275. He asked Arthur to repeat the number. Arthur did. The chief said he would have to look into it and call him back. The call back came 2 hours later. The chief's tone had changed. It was now a mixture of embarrassment and awe. "Mr. Mills," he said, "we found it. It's still on the books. My God. We have to pull the condemnation order immediately. Please extend our deepest apologies to your client. Inspector Chen was acting in good faith based on current standards, but he was uninformed of this exemption." The bureaucracy, once set in motion against Silas, now moved with surprising speed to correct its error. An official rescission order was typed up.
A letter of formal apology was drafted and signed by the regional director, and it was decided that the person to deliver these documents should be the inspector who had posted the original notice. Which is how David Chen found himself back on Silas Blackwood's gravel road on the morning of Friday, October 16th. His Ford sedan seemed less confident this time. He walked up to the porch, not with a clipboard, but with a single white envelope in his hand. Silas was there, sitting in his rocking chair. Michael stood by the door, watching. Chen cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, his voice tight with humility. I am here to deliver this letter from my regional director. It is a formal apology. The condemnation notice posted on your smokehouse was issued in error. It is hereby rescinded." He handed the envelope to Silas. Silas took it but didn't open it. He just held it in his lap. "Your facility," Chen continued, struggling with the words, "is exempt under the Agricultural Heritage Act of 1953. I was not aware of this statute. It was a failure in my training, and I apologize." For a long moment, Silas said nothing. He just rocked gently, the old wood of the chair creaking rhythmically. Then he looked at Chen, and his eyes were not triumphant. They were understanding. "You were doing your job, son," he said. "Your job is to make sure everything is the same, safe and the same. My job is to make sure this one thing stays different." He nodded toward the smokehouse. "Would you go and take that yellow paper off my door now?" David Chen looked as if he might break. He just nodded, walked over to the smokehouse, and carefully pulled a thumbtack from the cypress door. He folded the yellow notice into a neat square and put it in his pocket. He turned back, gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head towards Silas, and walked back to his car. It became a local legend, told and retold at the feed store, at the church potluck, at the diner in town. Silas Blackwood became something more than just a stubborn old farmer. He became a symbol of quiet resistance, a guardian of a wisdom that couldn't be quantified on a clipboard. The price of his hams didn't go up. He still charged $75, but the waiting list for them grew to 3 years. People didn't just want to buy a ham anymore. They wanted to buy a piece of the story. David Chen was not fired. In fact, he became a better inspector. The experience had humbled him, cracked the hard shell of his data-driven certainty. He learned that not all knowledge is found in textbooks or federal codes. He began to ask questions before he issued citations. He started to listen to the stories of the old-timers, to understand the why behind their methods, not just the what. Years later, he would become instrumental in creating a new USDA designation for heritage food artisans, a program that sought to work with, rather than against, traditional producers. And Michael? Michael finished his degree in agricultural science, but he came home. He didn't come home to modernize the farm. He came home to learn. He spent the next 10 years as his grandfather's apprentice. He learned the feel of the salt, the smell of the cool smoke, the look of the perfect green mold. He learned the rhythm of the seasons and the patience required to turn hog and salt and thyme into something transcendent. When Silas passed away at the age of 89, he left Michael the farm, the salt bags, the key to the smokehouse, and the faded photocopy of the 1954 ledger entry, framed now and hanging in the kitchen. The farm is still there. The smokehouse, now 135 years old, still stands.
And every autumn, Michael Blackwood, now a man of 55, with gnarled hands of his own, still cures 16 hams in the old way. He does it not just because it's tradition, but because he learned the most important lesson during that 1 week in October of 1987. It wasn't that the old ways are always better than the new. It was that the things that survive, the things that have real value, are not the products of rigid, unthinking systems. They are the products of a deep, patient, and loving conversation between a person and a place, a conversation that spans generations. The smokehouse wasn't just a building. It was one side of a long and fruitful argument with time itself, and on that Friday, time had won.